The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
A very warm welcome to Squawk Box Europe on what is an incredibly busy day, corporately and geopolitically. I'm Steve Sedgwick with Karen Cho, and these are your headlines. The Chinese President Xi Jinping rolling out the red carpet, kicking off a long-awaited summit with President Trump in Beijing and hailing a new chapter for the world's two largest economies.
Whenever we had a problem, we worked it out very quickly, and we're going to have a fantastic future together.
The world has reached a new crossroads, whether China and the United States can move beyond the so-called Thucydides trap and set a new example in bilateral relations between major powers.
UK Health Secretary Wes Streeting reportedly prepares to launch a leadership challenge against Sir Keir Starmer as soon as today. Opposition leader Kemi Badenoch goes on the attack after the King's speech.
The Prime Minister is in office but not in power. It is clear his authority has gone and that he will not be able to deliver what little there is in this King's speech.
Our parties both had tough results in the local elections last week. The difference is, she hasn't noticed.
The US Senate narrowly confirms Kevin Warsh as the next Fed chair, succeeding Jerome Powell and ushering in a new era for the US Central Bank.
Morning, Karen. Look, there's a lot going on, everybody, and a lot of it is pretty negative in terms of economic growth, in terms of the growth of inflation, in terms of the geopolitics. But actually, amidst that, the UK GDP figures are mildly better than expected. UK first quarter preliminary GDP up 0.6% versus the fourth quarter up 0.2%. The Reuters poll was for up 0.6%. So better than previous, in line on that front. The GDP output figure, though, much better than the Reuters poll of up 0.7%, has come in at up 1.2%. A 3-month on 3-month UK economy growing in line with expectations, up 0.6%. And the March GDP alone, month on month, up 0.3% versus a negative 0.2% poll as well. So much better than expected. Why isn't the pound rallying on the back of it? Well, because of the next story. And normally Karen and I would chat about GDP, but we've got a really packed show. So I want to move on and tell you the reason why I believe the pound isn't rallying is because of this. UK Health Secretary Wes Streeting could reportedly resign from the government and launch a leadership bid as soon as today. The latest development in a dramatic week for British politics. Whittaker, oh my goodness me, I've been reading, will he, won't he, does he have the 81 numbers that you've been telling us about for ages? Well, does he only have 30 or does he have 120? Tell us what you're seeing.
Yes, Steve, I think the numbers here are really going to be key when it comes to Wes Streeting. The Health Secretary reportedly could be poised to strike as soon as today for that leadership bid. That is, according to his allies. Reports say that he would resign as the Health Secretary and then formally challenge the Prime Minister for the leadership. But as you've mentioned there, provided he can get the 81 colleagues coalescing behind him that he needs. Now, we know that Streeting had a meeting with the Prime Minister just behind me in number 10 that lasted just 16 minutes. We didn't get any lines from that. It was thought that Streeting didn't want to detract from the King's speech, but we could get more lines, as we know from today. So, meanwhile, it is, of course, presumed that the Prime Minister would continue to fight back. But the other big question, Steve, is who could the other candidates be? Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, he can't stand yet. He's not an MP, but there are reports this morning that maybe that Rusholme seat could become available. But as we've discussed previously, he's still got a long challenge, a long road ahead of him with that, and those reports have not been confirmed. If he doesn't, then could it be Angela Rayner or Ed Miliband? Now, with Angela Rayner, the HRMC have actually cleared her tax affairs, so that could be one hurdle out of the way. We are seeing, as you mentioned at the top of the show, the pound dropping on this news as well. So a lot of fast-moving developments. We'll keep you posted as always.
Thank you very much, Ritika. And just a quick line, the UK Chancellor now weighing in this morning saying, this is from Rachel Reeves, saying after the GDP figures, now is not the time to put our economic stability at risk. So commenting on the back of the figures that have just crossed the tape. Our US President Donald Trump has kicked off a high-stakes summit with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, with the two leaders sitting down for bilateral talks in Beijing. Trump praised his relationship with Xi, also touting the delegation of US business leaders accompanying him on the trip.
We've had a fantastic relationship. We've gotten along. When there were difficulties, we worked it out. I would call you and you would call me. And whenever we had a problem, people don't know, whenever we had a problem, we worked it out very quickly. We're going to have a fantastic future together. Such respect for China, the job you've done. You're a great leader. I say it to everybody. You're a great leader. Sometimes people don't like me saying it, but I say it anyway because it's true. I only say the truth. And I just want to say on behalf of all of the great delegation that we have the greatest businessmen, the biggest, and I guess the best in the world. We have amazing people, and they're all with me. Every single one of them, we asked the top 30 in the world, every single one of them said yes. And I didn't want the second or the third in the company. I wanted only the top. And they're here today to pay respects to you and to China. And they look forward to trade and doing business. And it's going to be totally reciprocal on our behalf. So I really look very much forward to our discussion. It's a big discussion. There are those that say this is maybe the biggest summit ever.
Let's get out to Elaine for more. Elaine, we can hear a lot of flattery there in that commentary from President Trump. But the reality is the two leaders have a lot of flashpoints to navigate: the sale of arms to Taiwan, the Iran conflict, trade. Some commentators believe it might just be the best outcome if the two manage to not rock the boat at this stage.
That's right. And you mentioned Taiwan. That is really a key issue and the most sensitive one for Beijing. President Xi, in his opening remarks, told President Trump that this is the most important issue in China-U.S. relations, saying that if it is handled poorly, then the two countries will clash and even go into conflict. So some strong words from the Chinese president there. He said the U.S. side must handle the Taiwan question with, quote, utmost caution. And so we'll see what happens to the arms packages to Taiwan that the U.S. Congress has approved, but still awaiting Trump's formal notification that is mandatory for the sale to move ahead. But there was also a more positive tone when it comes to businesses. Xi said that China's door of opening up will only become wider, and this is as we have some of the most powerful American tech and business executives in the room with them, with the president. Xi said that the U.S. businesses have participated deeply in China's opening up and that China welcomes the U.S. to strengthen mutually beneficial cooperation. Now, we have Apple's Tim Cook, Elon Musk of Tesla, and also Boeing's Kelly Ortberg, and also the surprise last-minute inclusion of NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang. And we'll be watching what happens with NVIDIA because this company epitomizes what it's like to be caught between Washington and Beijing. The U.S. has green-lighted the H200 AI chips to China, with Reuters reporting that the U.S. cleared around 10 Chinese firms to get these H200 chips. But so far, not a single delivery has been made, according to Reuters. And Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary of the U.S., also said a couple weeks ago that this is because these Chinese companies have had difficulty securing permission from the Chinese government, who wants to promote domestic alternatives as well. So one of the things we'll be watching is if there could be any breakthroughs with this, and if Jensen Huang can get China to really import and buy these chips, because that could mean billions of dollars of revenue on the line for NVIDIA. Karen?
Brilliant. I'll pick up there. Great coverage from Beijing. We'll see you a little bit later on. Thank you. For more on the high-stakes Beijing summit and references to the Thucydides trap. Oh, my God, it's such a good book. Please read it. Please. If you haven't read the Thucydides trap and you're going to read one geopolitical book, I'm not even on a commission. Mr. Allinson doesn't get a penny from me. Head to CNBC.com. On a programming note, our US colleagues will be speaking exclusively to the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. Don't miss that conversation coming up at 11 London time. John Vellis is FX and macro strategy for the Americas, BMY. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you if you've read it.
Sounds like I need to.
You do.
I will.
You do. It's about the rivalry between great powers. There you go. I've done the brief summary. Look, I want to concentrate on something that's completely different from everyone else who's looking at the moment. No, not everyone, but it piqued my interest. The president's under a lot of pressure for many reasons. But I think that the Treasury auction, the 30-year paper Treasury auction yesterday, which went through with a pretty low score from the analysts as well, at the highest yield since 2007. Now, everybody, just think about this. That's the most America has had to pay for a 30-year paper since 2007. I think that is potentially very, very interesting. But more importantly, John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'd go even further and say it's somewhat surprising and a bit concerning. Now, it was granted a C minus grade by the analysts, as we found out. And the thing is, we have, at BNY, we have $70 trillion in data of custody holdings within the bank. So it's 20% of what's listed on world markets. And we have seen foreign participation in U.S. Treasury purchases quite moribund, if not even negative, more or less since April last year. And it's not really sell America, it was more hedge America. But now, with extended spending, with the likelihood of asking for more money for Congress for the war, with inflation, and the debt as it is, it's not a surprise to see these yields beginning to react, especially with the oil crisis around the background.
To that point, break-evens are also starting to flash up on the radar for a lot of investors, looking at the long-term potential now. And this was a debate we were having the other day about where inflation actually lands. The 2% used to be the target. It felt like 3% just started to creep in and was undermining that anchoring around the 2% mark. Right. Suddenly, we're having to look through a 4% handle now. So what do investors do with these break-evens?
Well, the long-term break-evens are still pretty anchored, as the Fed would say, right? They haven't really gotten, and that was the case during the inflation scare of 2022 and 2023 as well. The long-term inflation expectations stayed, around 2.5% or something like that. The short-term inflation expectations have really ramped up, understandably, in response to the oil shock. If the oil shock is maintained and the Fed doesn't raise rates, which is unlikely to do in this environment, but they won't cut, but then I think what you'll see is those break-evens can spill into shorter-term break-evens can spill into longer-term break-evens and higher inflation expectations over the long term, and that's a problem.
Which auction, tepid demand at best, plus higher longer-term expectations on inflation, that is a very tricky mix for a man who is just about to take over as the chair of the Federal Reserve, who is put in his position. I know he's going to be independent. I'm pretty sure he's going to do it regardless of the pressure put on him, but a man who Trump thinks will lower rates.
Yeah, it puts a lot of pressure, and you have a committee that has...
Kevin Warsh, by the way, I should say.
Kevin Warsh.
He got his Senate confirmation yesterday.
And you have an FOMC that dissented 3 times in a hawkish direction, not on rates, but on the statement. And frankly, you had to read the statement with a fine-tooth comb to really find that it wasn't as balanced as they wanted it to be. The point is, the committee is not in a mood to cut rates right now, and they can. I don't even think Kevin Warsh would be willing to cut rates. My view is that if and when this the straits open and this conflict recedes somewhat, and I don't have a forecast on that, I'm benchmarking sometime this summer, but that's based on nothing other than throwing a dart and thinking that seems long enough. I mean, that's really low-level analysis. Maybe I should read the Thucydides trap. But the point is, if that's the case and inflation starts to ease and looks to have peaked, particularly the oil prices, maybe if the labor market deteriorates over the course of the summer, you'll see some rate cuts in the fourth quarter, second half of the year. I think that's sort of what some analysts, myself included, are still betting on, but it's really conditional on the war ending.
Do you want to talk about the wide range of forecasts now? Because as you mentioned, the possibility of rate cuts. Others are talking about rate hikes, whether that's later this year, early into next year. That is a huge gap in terms of market forecasting.
Yeah, and you can say that's reflected in the committee in their various statements, not just in the recent month, but really since the war began. There's a mix of opinions on the committee, there's a mix of opinions on the street, and I think that's completely understandable. Both goals are in tension. The U.S. economy is facing this massive shock. We've got a fiscal problem. And the model, the economic model, looks to have changed. So, of course, we're going to have lots of uncertainty, particularly in this kind of an environment.
What do you think that means for the US dollar then? Because if you have a wide range of scenarios for the macroeconomic backdrop, what does it mean in terms of just US dollar hedging and the swings and roundabouts we're going to see for the currency?
Very good question. We've seen a lot of hedging, particularly since Liberation Day, and everyone left US markets and then started to pile back in, but they piled in hedged, which prevented the dollar from really strengthening very much during that period. The point is, currently going forward, as long as the Strait remains closed and there's a premium on oil and there's a premium on geopolitical risk, the dollar will stay bid at around 98 DXY. That's been the case for several weeks now. If this ends, and or it looks like the Fed is going to cut rates, and other central banks are less likely to do that, then I think the dollar weakens somewhat. And we have longer term structural issues we can talk about, but in the short to medium term, the direction is stay where it is as long as the conflict's hot, and then eventually you'll see, once that recedes, I think the dollar will come off.
Got to ask you about cable.
Yeah.
135. Despite the concern in the UK gilt market, and I think to a degree in UK assets generally, pound steady as she goes.
That's right. Well, actually, so is euro, so are most of the currencies. As I said, if you think that most of these currencies, sterling accepted because it's got its own idiosyncratic problems, most of these currencies haven't moved very much with the dollar at 98. So sterling at 135 is probably where it would be under any circumstances, given the broader currency orientation of the markets.
A quick note on the Japanese yen. I mean, obviously the market's watching very closely for intervention at any given moment.
Yeah.
Besson obviously weighing in recently too. What do authorities do with it?
Well, they can't, if they intervene yet again, the IMF would actually rate them as a managed currency rather than a free float if they intervene 3 times within a certain period. So that's one thing that we have to think about. The other thing is really, it's got to get up to 160 before we start to worry about intervention. And that seems to have been sort of the natural break for it on the top side because of that threat of intervention.
I think we're going to leave it there.
Great.
John, lovely to see you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for negotiating, giving us a calm voice. I mean, well, crazy times in many ways. John Bennett, who is the FX and macro strategist for the Americas at BNY.
Plenty coming up on the show today. The Senate confirms President Trump's pick for Fed chair, with Kevin Warsh officially set to succeed Jerome Powell. Plus, Burberry earnings just crossing the wires. We'll break down the numbers with Charlotte. And amid a surge in EV demand on the back of soaring oil prices, we're joined by the CEO of Polestar. That is coming up after the break.
Executive Decisions is the new podcast from CNBC, where I ask powerful leaders about their decisions that changed everything. I'm Steve Sedgwick, and here's the CEO of Siemens Energy, Christian Bruch.
Business leaders should not stay quiet in a world which is super complex. We sit in a privileged position, and we have to use that to ensure that a society remains prosperous, stable, successful.
That's Executive Decisions with me, Steve Sedgwick. Get it wherever you're listening to this.
Electric vehicles have seen a surge in demand since the war in Iran amid surging fuel prices, particularly for second-hand models, which have seen prices spike. And joining us now is Michael Lohscheller, who's the CEO of Polestar. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We have heard these sort of rumblings from other automakers as well, that the conflict in the Middle East that's having some bearing at the pump is actually driving those intentions around cars. What are you witnessing firsthand at Polestar?
Well, we see exactly the same. So a couple of weeks ago, I actually talked about this and called it pump anxiety, and that's exactly what is happening. People are concerned, how much do I pay at the gas station? And what we see at Polestar is a strong increase in terms of demand for used cars first, but also interest in new cars, right? And if you think about that, in the past, people considered EVs for idealistic reasons, and now the decision is all about money. And you get new technology, probably at lower cost. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that this will continue, and that's helping, obviously, Polestar too.
You can see the rationale that if you've got this upfront cost when you buy an EV, it's more than if you're buying an ICE engine, but you're still paying up at the pump if you're getting an ICE engine. That said, there must be some price sensitivity at some point. Where do you think that lies when we're talking about such a big ticket item?
Yeah, I mean, what people are looking for is always price parity. They compare ICE with electric cars, right? And electric cars, running them was more expensive in the past, but now that is shifting, right? So ICE engine becomes more expensive. So I think this could lead to a long-term transformation and really, really positive for EVs.
Let me ask you a very basic question. I'm going to buy an EV next because I own diesel, I own petrol, but I live in the middle of the countryside, and it's always been my worry about range. Why would I, again, this is a strange question, but why would I buy a Polestar rather than the massive other options that are out there at the moment?
Well, first of all, we want to be very unique. So Polestar stands out in terms of Swedish design. We have performance cars, and we focus a lot on sustainability. That is something especially younger customers are very interested, and it's really, really important. And the times where people worried about range, they're also over because, I mean, our cars have ranges up to 600 kilometers, right? So you don't worry about that.
Unless you've got the aircon on and the heating in the middle of the winter and it's cold and you've got other electric things being used. It's not 600k, is it?
No, but then it's less. But even then, range anxiety is gone. Yeah. And I think we really see the pump anxiety and people worry about the monthly budget, right? And it's expensive, as we discussed, right?
Polestar is fascinating for so many reasons. And let me just tell viewers, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you're based in Gothenburg. And Gothenburg's a very important city in the history of automotive because it is Volvo town. But what is fascinating is I know that you design the cars in Sweden, you engineer them in Sweden, but you don't make a car in Sweden. You make cars in, let's get this right, South Korea, United States, and Chengdu and Hangzhou.
Correct.
So the point is, it's another Chinese brand that's kind of making itself out to be a Swedish brand, isn't it?
Well, I think what's so interesting and fascinating about Polestar is we don't own our factories, but we are a Swedish brand. That's also how we position it. But we work very closely with Geely and Volvo, so we have access to latest, best technology. And I think automotive of the future will be about partnership, alliances. You don't do everything on your own, as many companies have done the last couple of decades, right? So it's about getting access to greatest technology, manage this, and that's exactly what we're doing at Polestar.
Will Europe, and you're in a unique position, you've been at other automotive places as well, and I know a little bit about your history as well, and obviously we've talked about cars off camera as well. Will Europe be able to produce EVs in Europe and compete with you and the other Chinese manufacturers?
Absolutely, and that's so important, right? Because automotive industry is super competitive, right? Look at what is happening in China. The market becomes hyper competitive, but by forming alliances, by really compete, Europe needs to speed up, and it also needs more clarity.
But Michael, everywhere I look, I see middle-class mums, for want of a better word, who wouldn't have touched a Chinese brand a couple of years ago, buying all these, and I see all these brands set up, and I'm like, well, what's that? I've never heard of those, and whether it's an SUV, or whether it's a BYD, whether it's a Polestar, so can Europe really compete with China?
Oh, absolutely, and look at Polestar. I mean, Swedish brand, Swedish design. I mean, that's what people...
Chinese made.
Yeah, but we have access to greatest technology. So it's really about Sweden, so we can compete. And look, we have strong growth rates. We had the best first quarter now, so things are going in the right direction. Europe has to compete and can compete, absolutely.
One of the challenges for European companies, and even for Japanese companies too, has been bringing cars to market quickly like the Chinese are doing. How quickly can you bring a new car launch to market?
Oh, we are super fast, right?
How fast?
So, I mean, you talk like 24 months, right? So, good example, next year we're bringing the Polestar 2 successor. We decided this in the fourth quarter of last year. And with all the access, the greatest technology, we can be really, really fast. And that is the future of automotive. Things have to go faster and much, much better than before.
So when the rivals are talking about speeding up that trajectory, Japan to Europe, does that make a difference? Does that make them much more competitive as a force?
Oh, absolutely, because you also can change things faster, right? And consumers want more new things, right? So speed is of key essence, right? And I'm super happy that Polestar can go this super fast way.
Do you want to talk about the relaunch, the revamped versions that you've had? Polestar 3, the flagship SUV, you've got the Polestar 4, the coupe. This has been rolling out across Canada and European markets. What are you hoping for with the revamped lineup?
Well, we have a big product offensive coming now with 4 cars in the next 3 years, right? And going into the big segments of the market with the big profit pools, right? And of course, that's how we want to improve the business significantly. And therefore, speed again is so important, right? You can't do this over 5-6 years, right? So we do 4 cars in 3 years, biggest product offensive Polestar ever had. So we're optimistic about that.
In terms of the United States, I really want to know what the situation is there at the moment. You've got a president who hates wind turbines. Let's be brutally honest about it, and I don't think I'm being political by saying so. He doesn't seem to be a great advocate of renewables more generally. You've got an energy crunch going on in the US because of this vast amount of data center build out that's happening, which is all of a sudden making the situation where actually they're worried about where they're going to get their energy from in the United States. It should be a slam dunk that EVs take off in the US as well, but we've seen these massive write-downs from the US manufacturers and others as well. So how are you negotiating in the United States given these strange crosswinds?
Well, I think the big topic in the US, we have a lot of uncertainty, right? Tax incentive disappear, right? And people worry about the cost. Despite all this, the US is still a big EV market, right? Especially West Coast, East Coast. But of course, tariffs also not helping. And the consistent uncertainty is a topic. And we try to balance that too, right?
So it's a really tough market at the moment, is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the sales?
We actually were down in the US quite a bit, right? And we want to optimize volume profitability. But US stays a big market and is important for us.
Do you make cars in the US as well?
Yes,
you do.
Produce actually in Charleston in a Volvo plant, so that's a good setup.
And so that can offset tariffs, or is it because because the other thing that, dare I say it, certain politicians don't appreciate is that it's a global industry to create a car.
Yeah, local manufacturing.
Parts go back and forth across the border.
Local manufacturing is actually the way to go, right? You want to produce where your customers are. That is helping logistics cost, working capital, and also tariffs. But of course, the US still has other tariffs from Mexico and other countries. So, and the uncertainty is what makes it so difficult, right? Automotive is about long-term investment. We invest into the future, and we would appreciate if there is more certainty.
Michael, there's another element here which is around national security, and increasingly as we talk about technology, there are problems about where you can make, where you can sell product. This crossover has worked so well for you when it comes to the backing of the Chinese, but are there issues down the track the more advanced the equipment gets? Do you see national security implications?
Well, obviously, we follow all the regulations and we store the data locally. I mean, more and more regulations are there, and obviously we comply with all of them in all the 28 markets we operate. But it gets more sophisticated, but we pay a lot of attention that obviously we do the right things here.
Do you see the car changing in future? Because one of the issues that the car was meant to become was this central hub, but that never really shifted away from the phone. The phone still has become the most dominant device that we use. Down the track, when you've got more AI, you've got more technology in a car, do you think it's going to become that centralized hub that it always promised to become?
Oh, absolutely, and it's happening right now. So software-defined vehicles are the future. Look at Polestar, we can do over-the-air updates constantly. Customers love it because they see the differences. They see like, hey, my car is improving. And of course, you can do changes much, much faster. Also, smart cockpit, those are the topics of the future. That's what consumers, especially younger ones, want, and we deliver on those.
I suppose this ties in with a couple of other big thematics. Karen is an expert on AI around the desk. I'm not, but I've done a lot of work on Internet of Things as well. So just tying that all together, and what you just said, Karen, about the smart hub as well. Look, I'm in a very privileged position. I live in my own plot, and I have got space for a battery, for solar panels, for ground source, air source, and this electric car, which I will be buying at some stage. I don't know which one I'll be buying, but I will be. Will this connect with my house, do you think, in the next few years? And actually the whole thing is going to become that hub that Karen was talking about, where I can get the power I can store the power, I can use the car as a power source and what have you. Is that going to happen?
Oh, absolutely. And we see more and more countries where actually what we call vehicle to grid, vehicle to home becomes so important for consumers, because they say, hey, look, in case I need more electricity and I want to get it cheaper,
in case the Straits of Hormuz are closed.
Whatever. No, seriously, people are super interested. I visit dealers, customers so many times, and they talk about vehicle to grid, vehicle to home.
Can I do that now?
We can do that with the Polestar 3 now with the coming model year. And those are the topic of the future, and we don't announce them for like 3 years' time. They're coming now.
One of the other big topics of the future is self-driving and how that could revolutionise the ownership of cars. I mean, robo-taxis, we hear, are coming very quickly. If we start to get into a model where we're not driving cars anymore, in fact, we're jumping more into a driverless car, doesn't that change the ownership model completely, where we might be owning a car to rent it out, to not have it as our own personal car anymore?
Yeah, well, this business model will come up and will be interesting, but I think it's a transition to that, right? So, for example, we position
Polestar... What
Polestar...
sort of a transition? Are we talking 10-year transition, 2, 3, 4?
Well, probably between 5 and 10,
okay.
Right? But also, many people still want to drive. For example, we have performance cars. People love to drive, right? But then assisting systems, that helps, but it's a transition and it will take more.